Hanukkah this year, and we will not read Miketz on Hanukkah, very unusual Kaviyas this year. So I've chosen the first part of the Parsha, Rishon, to look at the Parsha titled Not All Brothers Are the Same, and indeed that is the case, but particularly here in the story of Yaakov and his children. Ella told us Yaakov, Yosef ben Shvas Rishana Hayeroes Achabat Zayin. Yosef was 17 years old, grazing with his brothers, the sheep. He was a lad. He frequented the children of Bilhah and Zilpah, Neshei Aviv, the wives of his father. And Yosef brought bad reports about them to their father. Then we move on to Yisrael. Yisrael, or Yaakov, loved Yosef, Mikol Banov, more than all his children. Kiven Zekunim Huloi, he was born in his old age, or he was the boy who he learnt with, the child of Chachma. The Osaloik Senes Pasim, and he made for him a coat of pasim, of silk, or of a material called melas, clay melas. Vayira Yaakov and his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all the other brothers, and that brought hatred. They hated him. They could not speak with him peacefully. Rashi tells us, by the way, that this was one of the a silver lining in the relationship. They weren't two-faced. What they said is what they felt. Yosef had a dream. He tells it to his brothers. So they continue to hate him, or they hurt him further. And he says to them, listen to the dream that I've dreamt. Now, what is not clear from the psukim here is which brothers were the focus of Yosef's reports and what were his accusations. And here we have a dispute among the Rishonim, Machlokas, and let's have a look first at Rashi. So Rashi says, what were the accusations? Dibasam Ra, Kol Ra, whatever bad he could see among his brothers, the children of Leah. Those are the key words, children of Leah. According to Rashi, it's clear from Rashi's explanation that the focus of Yosef's reports were on the brothers of Leah, Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, etc. And it was those brothers' actions that he would report to his father. What were the accusations? They were eating Eva Menachai, a limb from a living creature. They were insulting the children of the Shvachos, meaning Bilhah and Zilpah, to call them avodim. They were calling them half-castes or slaves. V'chashudim ala royos, and they were also suspected about not keeping morality, or suspected of doing immorality. And ubishloshtem laka, in all three areas, he was punished. Because when they get sold into slavery, there's a little, when they go and report and pretend that he's been eaten by a wild animal, it says that they slaughtered a goat. Didn't need to say that. Why did it need to say they shechted a goat when they sold him? Meaning, to tell you, the Torah is publicizing the fact that they were careful about Eva Menachai. They didn't eat Eva Menachai, but they actually slaughtered it and made a proper shchita. What about the report that he called them avodim? In response to that, Hashem says, okay, la'avadim ka Yosef. Yosef will be sold as an avad, as a slave. What about the immorality that he told about them? He was faced with a very, very great challenge. Vatisa Aisha Sadainov, and the wife of his master, Potiphar's wife, lifts her eyes to him and tries to seduce him. And he suffers for it, as he refuses her demands or advances, and ends up in prison for many years. Well, Rashi does say it's the brothers, the children of Leah, but what forces Rashi to do that, to say that? How do we know which brothers were the focus of Yosef's reporting? We look at the Sifsei Chachamim on the Rashi. He explains that when Rashi says, when the Pasuk says B'nai Leah, the brothers, the children of Leah, it doesn't say the words B'nai Leah at all in the Pasuk. On the contrary, the Pasuk simply says Stam es Echov. So although the verse only says his brothers, Yesh Lomar, we can explain, because Yosef showed special affection. He showed a special love for the children of the shpachos. They were perhaps the underdogs, as we say, in his eyes. Therefore, if they were really Rishoim in his eyes, if he felt that they were doing bad things, Averos, then how could he show them so much love and so much protection, etc.? Doesn't make sense. He's loving one and not loving the others. Elamai, what must we say? So therefore, and further, he was their friend, he was their oyev. So certainly you must say that the Dibah, the reports could not be about them. Must have been about the other brothers, the brothers who were the B'nai Leah, the children of Leah. But if that's the case, that raises the question about safety, about security. How come we don't find that the other brothers are protecting Yosef? The children of the shpachos don't stick up for him. And there's quite a few, there's 4 of them. And they're not weaklings at all. We're talking here about Don. So the Ramban explains, and the Ramban actually asks this on Rashi. He says, if according to Rashi, if it's the case that he only brought reports about the other brothers, B'nai Leah, but he was so friendly with the B'nai Shpachos, and he was makaring them so much, and he would tell his father about the other brothers. So why is it that Lama Lohit, as the Ramban puts it, Lama Lohit Silu B'nai Shpachos? Why did the other children of the Shpachos not save him? Ve'im Noimar, if you want to say, Sheyoru, that they're frightened from the brothers. Well, let's analyze. How many of the other brothers of the children of Leah really wanted to kill him? Everybody, perhaps, but not Reuben. So look, we've got already 4 brothers coming from the shpachos, from the maidservants, from Bilhah and Zilpah. We've got Reuven with them as well, who certainly didn't want to kill Yosef. In fact, wanted to save him, as the Pasuk testifies later on in the Parsha. You've got Yosef, of course, with them as well. That's already 6 of the brothers. The Tigbar Yodam Aleim, says the Ramban. Surely they should have had the upper hand. And even the Af, even if they would not come to war. The Oid, and furthermore, says the Ramban, as the story unfolds in Parshas Vayeshev, Nira bekasuv ki kulam hiskimu b'mchirosai. It seems that they all agreed to his sale. And therefore, Ramban feels that he cannot learn like Rashi, and that in fact he was bringing reports about all of the brothers, not just the children of Leah. He does, however, recognize that in the Medrash, Ladas Rabbeinu versus Rabba, al kulam, on the contrary, Ladas Rabbeinu b'Midrash Rabba, al kulam hoyemoitzidiba. He says that even the Medrash says that in fact the bad reports were brought about all the brothers. If that's the case, how will the Ramban learn the words V'hunar es b'nei Vila v'es b'nei Zilpah? How will Neshayava, the wives of his father, how will the Ramban learn that? If he's so friendly with them and always with them and being the car of them, then why is it that he's telling reports about them as well? Explains the Ramban that what it means by V'hu im b'nei Vila b'nei Zilpah, Neshayava, means simply Tamid lo yipared mahem bavun arasai. It means that he was very young, and because of his youth, his father wanted them to almost be minding of him. They were his minders. Lahem sibavim sheyishmeruhu v'yoshasuhu. They should help him. They should protect him. Remember that Yosef was the apple of Yaakov's eye. The Pasuk clearly says that, and therefore he wanted them, the other brothers, to make sure to protect him. Nothing to do with being friendly or overly friendly with them. Nothing to do with being makar of them. But at the time that Yosef was with the brothers that were the children of Bilhah and Zilpah, he had ample opportunity to see that they too were doing bad things, and therefore Yisna'uhu Eloha Arba Achim, and therefore the hatred was felt not just by the children of Leah, but these 4 brothers as well, the children of Bilhah and Zilpah. V'yacha ken Amar, and afterwards it says that his father loved him, and the other brothers, saw clearly that their father loved him more than everything, and therefore they were jealous of him, they hated of him. Nimtzad comes out, says the Ramban, Sonu Mikulam, he was hated on all sides. B'nei Hagviros, the children of the Leah, of the senior wives, Yikanu boy, they were out jealous of him. Why does he love them more than anything else? Surely they are just as much the children of the Gevira. They come from Leah, like he comes from Rachel. The Bnei Hashpachos, however, who didn't have that same jealousy, perhaps, Lemalosalem, because they were perhaps feeling, well, we don't come from Leah or Rachel, but they were hating him because he brought bad reports about them to their father. So what a turnaround. According to Ramban, the dibosom, the bad reports, was really focused on the children of Bilhah and Zilpah, on them. And if we look closely at the pasuk, you can understand, or you could really feel for the Ramban learning that way. Let's look at the verse again. Yosef was 17 years old, grazing with his brothers the sheep. He was a lad with the Bnei Bilhah Bnei Zilpah, and Yosef brings their report el Aviam. Well, the way the Ramban learns, Ramban says that because he was with the Bnei Bilhah and Zilpah so much of the time, he had the maximum opportunity to see and inspect what they were doing, and he brought reports about them to their father. As the Ramban put it, he was hated on all sides. The brothers of the Geviras, the brothers of Leah, because of the jealousy, and the other brothers that were coming from Bilhah and Zilpah, because of the bad reports. The reverse, in fact, of how Rashi learns. Certainly, the commentaries after the Mefarshim of Rashi, they bring this question of the Ramban. The Gur Aryeh, famously, who often defends Rashi here, actually does something quite unusual. He brings the Ramban, who asks that question, and he says, why didn't the Bnei Hashpachos save him if there was no bad reports, and so forth? So the Gur Aryeh answers and says, Ein ikar hasina bishvil hadiba. He says the main hatred was never because of the bad reports. Yes, it was unpleasant, but that was not the hatred. It just never says when they came and they see him coming, they don't say, oh, here he is. This is the guy that told on us. When they see him coming down the path, they say, Baal hachaloimos. Says the Gur Aryeh, their focus is on the fact, here comes the dreamer. This is the man who has the dreams that he's going to rule over us. They all agreed and all participated in the sale. Says the Gur Aryeh, because when it comes to the dream, they all had the same complaint, the same reason for the hatred, the same reason to do away with him and his dreams. He's never going to rule over us. But although the Gur Aryeh has defended Rashi against the kasha of the Ramban, why did the Bnei Hashpachos not save Yosef? He does find it hard to accept that the reports were only about the tribes of Leah. And he says, I find it difficult. Why does Rashi want to learn that the reports were only about the children of Leah? Because he was Mekarev, because he was showing such an affinity. He was close with the Bnei Zilpah. Why does he need to do that? Right? The Gur Aryeh says, he didn't need to do that. Because the Bnei Leah were distancing the children of Leah and the children of Zilpah. They were distancing them. Yosef was also distanced. He was a lad. And therefore, the boys or the older brothers didn't feel an affinity to Yosef because he was a nar, v'hu nar. And for that reason, where did Yosef find that he would hang out, so to speak? It would be with Bnei Bilhah and Zilpah, not because he was makareving in them, not because he was showing them more friendship, but simply because they were like him. He was an outcast. They were an outcast. He was distanced from his other brothers of Leah, so were they. And if that's the case, how beautiful, says the Gerari, do the words of the Pasuk appear when they say, or how appropriate are these words, V'hunar es b'nei villa ves b'nei zilpa. He was a nar, he was a lad, he was young. And because he was young, there was no affinity with the older brothers, b'nei Leah. But similarly, b'nei villa and b'nei zilpa were also alone and felt at a distance. But why, Gur Aryeh says, why, oh why does Rashi want to learn that he was Mekarev them? And by doing so, the Gur Aryeh feels that Rashi has made life difficult to explain afterwards why the Lashon Hara, find it difficult to explain that the Lashon Hara, or that the words that he was bringing, were about all the brothers. According to Rashi, however, that Yosef was showing friendship to the Bnei Leah, Bnei Zilpah, and therefore it doesn't make sense to say that there was, that there was Lashon Hara about them, and he's only about the Bnei Leah. Why? Why do that? Why not just say that with Bnei Villa and Zilpah simply means that they were physically with Yosef. They were not distant from Yosef, but not because he was so overly friendly with them. And if that's the case, the Gur Aryeh now says, V'hashta hayahadiba al kulam. And therefore, we would be able to say that the Lashon Hara, or the speech he brought, the reports, were about all the brothers, v'chein nachai. Quite unusual how the Gur Aryeh actually, therefore, doesn't actually learn like Rashi here. He defends Rashi on the one hand against the Ramban's question, but at the same time feels that the Pasuk is really telling us that the Dibbo was about all of them. Well, a later commentary, Nachalas Yaakov on Rashi, comes to defend Rashi and says as follows: what's forcing Rashi to learn that the reports could not have been about the children of Bilhah and Zilpah, but reserved for the actions of the Bnei Leah, is because one of those three reports was the fact that he said that they were mezalzelin b'nei hashpachos, that they were insulting and using insulting terminology by describing the children of Bilhah and Zilpah as avodim, as slaves or half-castes. And if that's the case, there's no way at all that that could apply to the children of the shpachos. They were not accused of doing these things. On the contrary, they're the victims of that. And because one of these main reports that Rashi mentions, or that Chazal mentioned, what could only be said about the Bnei Leah, al korchacha b'Bnei Leah l'chod mari, therefore it was also logical for Rashi to assume that the other reports as well were things that were only the Bnei Leah doing, was only being done by the Bnei Leah. Okay. What the Gur Aryeh later on does bring up us is a question that's been asked throughout the generations, and that is, what's wrong with actually telling on the other brothers? Why was Yosef punished? The Chazal say, Rashi brought it, punished in three ways. Isn't it a mitzvah to inform a father about his children's behavior or lack of behavior? It's not Lashon Hara if you tell about someone that they're doing something wrong, if the purpose is for their improvement. So what was so bad about what Yosef did? He genuinely felt that they're doing the wrong thing. Let's have a look at the Gur Aryeh. If he sees the bad reports, why does he get punished? And in brackets, we find the Ram, the Mizrahi, asked this question. If a person sees something wrong, you see a child do something wrong, would you not tell the father in order to improve their ways so they won't commit the Avera? Now it's true, the Gemara in Arba Psachim brings down that there are three people that says Hashem cannot stand. Hashem utterly despises. One of them is if you know of an Avera that someone does, but you testify alone, Yechidi. You're the only one. And the Gemara says Hashem doesn't like that. You want to say something? So there should be two Eidim for anything. Halchashani, here it's different. Because he's only telling the father. He's not telling the courts. He's not going to Beis Din. And he was trusted by his father like two people. Kibei Trey. Why wouldn't he therefore tell it? Deloy Amrinan, we would not say Shaloi Lahoy not to testify, only when you're not trusted like two people. But Yosef was trusted by his father. Why shouldn't he tell? And therefore, Venira Loimar, it appears to me to say, the Vadai Heim Loi Osuze. The reason that he was punished is because they weren't doing what he was saying. It's what Yosef thought that they were doing, but not what they were actually doing. And we'll soon see a little bit more about that. Let's have a look at the accusations and see what in fact was happening. The first accusation, Eva Menachai, about eating a limb taken from a living creature. What were they doing, in fact? They were cutting from the Beis HaShchita, taking from the place where the animal shechted before the last breath of the animal was gone. Is that mutter to do? Well, technically, yes. Because once shchita, once slaughtering is done, the animal is mutter, permitted to be eaten. It says that clearly in the Gemara Kollel. If a person does have some sort of fetish, he wants to eat from the animal before it actually died, but it's been absolutely properly shechted. If he must have a beast before it dies, he can cut a piece of a kazais from the meat, from the place of the shchita, before it leaves, and it's mutter. Both for a goy and for a yid. Goy Yisrael mutar by. Why? Because there's no such thing that a goy would be osir, and for a Yisrael shari it would be permitted. A shchita, if it makes it mutter for Yisrael, it has to have made it mutter for a goy as well. What was the problem though? Yosef, however, thought that it was forbidden for them to do that. Why was he punished? Because he erred, according to the Guraria, he erred in understanding what they actually did. And he accused them of doing something they didn't do. And some of the Mefarshim actually say that the reason that he looked at it that way is because of the attitude that he had towards the other brothers. Very often, the attitude you have to someone else will dictate how you envisage their actions. Let's have a look at the second one. Accusation about calling the other brothers slaves. When they called them their slaves, it doesn't mean to say shehem avodim mamash, that they were actually slaves. All he wanted to say was that their mothers were, or they wanted to say was that their mothers were originally shvachos, were originally maidservants to their mothers, to Rachel and Leah, which is absolutely true. Bilhah and Zilpah were shvachos, were maidservants to Rachel and Leah respectively, and therefore Yosef went one step further to say, well, if they're calling and they're saying that the mothers of these tribes were originally shvachos, well, it stands to reason that they must be referring to the, doesn't it follow, therefore, that they are avodim, that they are slaves. According to the Gurari, however, they weren't actually calling them slaves at all, but they were just referring to their status of their mothers before this whole story, before the marriage of Yaakov with their mothers that took place. The third accusation about immoral behavior with women. Why did he think that? And according to the Guraria, that's because they were doing business with Benois Anshe Haaretz. They had a lot to do with the girls of the land. Yosef felt that was forbidden. They should be doing business with the men of the land, not the women of the land. And he quotes a Gemara in Kedushin that says it's not appropriate for a man to do business with the woman at all. But the halacha is not like that. The halacha is that if it's done l'shem shamayim, providing it's done for a heavenly purpose, it's mutter. So again, there was this accusation about something that really they didn't do. What's fascinating is, where did these three accusations come from? Where's the earliest source that we'll find them? The midrashic source for these three accusations is in the Medrash Rabbah. Let's have a look at how the Medrash describes it. Vayovei Yosef is dibasom ra'ah, and Yosef brought a bad report about them. Ma'amar, what did he say? Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Shimon. Says the Medrash, we're going to quote the opinions of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Huda, and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Meir says they were suspected about Eva Menachai, eating a limb from a living creature. Rabbi Shimon says, Tolen Hainen Esbaretz, they were putting their eyes on the girls of the land. They had an interest, a sinister interest in the girls. Rabbi Huda says they were insulting the children of the Shvachos of Bilam Zilpa, calling them Avodim. Now, what was the halachic argument between the brothers? And furthermore, look at the order of the Tanoim. When the Medrash Rabbah brings them, it brings them Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Huda, and Rabbi Shimon. That's not unusual. Very often in the Mishnayos, when you see a machlokes or you see opinions, you'll find Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Huda follow each other, and then Rabbi Shimon. That's not unusual. What is unusual is that after telling us the headline, who are the three great Tanoim that are going to talk about this issue, it starts saying Rabbi Meir first, yes. Then instead of Rabbi Huda, we find Rabbi Shimon mentioned. How strange. And then Rabbi Huda. This was picked up upon about 100 years ago in the Pardes Yosef, who actually asked this question. Why does the Medrash bring Rabbi Shimon's opinion about the immorality, the girls, in between or right after Rabbi Meir, that they were choshed about Eivim and Achai? And in an ingenious manner, the Pardes Yosef explains why the Medrash did that, why it changed the order purposely. The Ram Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi writes, what was their sin? He learns a bit different from the Gur Aryeh. He says that what Yosef noticed was that they were eating mefarkeses. What's mefarkeses mean? Mefarkeses means when an animal is still thrusting its feet, it's still showing signs of life. What's the halacha about such a thing? The halacha is that for a non-Jewish person, we're not talking about shchita, we're not talking about a proper shchita, but when an animal has been killed, the mefarkeses, and it's still moving about, is it mutter for a Jew? Is it mutter for a ben noach, for a goy or not? Yosef considered them as a ben noach. Ben noach means the children of the Noahide laws, not as a Yisrael. If they are a ben noach, then the halacha is that whilst the animal is mefarkeses, whilst the animal is still thrusting around, etc., it is forbidden. They consider themselves as a Yisrael, as a member of the Jewish people, and therefore permitted to have a mefarkeses. Sorry, this is after shchit, of course, if it's shechted, permitted to have mefarkeses. This was the debate, or this was the difference between them. And this is how Yosef felt. They got no right to eat it if they're mefarkeses, because we, Yosef, and Yosef includes himself as well, we, all the children of Yaakov, hundreds of years before the Torah has been given, are still considered Noahide people, B'nai Noach. When we are B'nai Yisrael, when did we become B'nai Yisrael? At the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. So therefore, we've got no right to eat mefarkeses. They, on the other hand, held no. We are already B'nai Yisrael. And they literally were B'nai Yisrael, but in a halachic sense, B'nai Yisrael. So we can eat mefarkeses. We can eat when it's still showing these throes of life. Continues the Pardes Yosef. If we understand the debate or the argument, this halachic argument, in this manner, B'yesh loima, we can say, Mishum halachud de'achlu mefarkeses lo topes oisam. If that were the only thing they did, that they were eating the meat of the animal while it was still shaking around, etc., if they were still doing that, Yosef wouldn't have made such a complaint. But he saw them doing some other things. And therefore, the Medrash quotes not Rabbi Shimon, not Rabbi Huda next, but Rabbi Shimon next. Why is that? In the Rambam it says that before Matan Torah, how did a person get married? How would a Jewish person get married before Matan Torah? You'd meet a woman in the marketplace and you'd take her to your house and live with her, and that's it. No formalities, no kiddushin, no giving her a ring in front of witnesses or giving her money in front of witnesses, etc. After Matan Torah, that all changed. There has to be a formal kinyan done in front of witnesses, under a chuppah, etc., etc. Chuppah and kiddushin. What did Yosef notice? Yosef noticed that they're just taking women, b'yichud ba'alma, and they're not proving a chuppah and kiddushin. Yosef was careful to do chuppah kiddushin. In fact, later on, in the end of the parashas, he actually shows his father the ksuba, and he tells his father, I marry chuppah and kedushin, when his father is suspecting and seeing a vision of bad kings coming from Yosef's children, etc. No, he did chuppah kedushin, but the brothers were not. Says Rabbi Shimon, Tolim einehem bivnosa oretz. They just put their eyes on the girls and took them without any formality of kiddushin and chuppah. If that's the case, Yosef says, no. This is not on. According to you, you hold that you're allowed to eat from the animal which is still throwing and still mefarkesa, still making those movements. Why? Because you hold that you are a Bnei Yisrael. You have a din of Yisrael. If you have a din of Yisrael, then how can you all of a sudden, when it comes to marriage or taking a wife, all of a sudden, no, you don't need chuppah and kiddushin. Mamonavshach, you're self-contradictory in your actions. This is what Yosef didn't like. And he came and told their father. And therefore, for that reason, the Medrash brings the words of Rabbi Shimon about the girls, taketh immediately after the story after the accusation of the Eber Menachai, because that set the contradiction clearly before their father's eyes. So when we look about the reaction to the reports and to the extra love shown by Yaakov to Yosef, we find that the Pasuk associates their hatred for Yosef with the extra love. And it doesn't associate it with the reports Yosef was bringing to their father. And that needs to be understood. Let's see that clearly. Let's have a look at that Pasuk and see how clearly that is the case. Yisrael loves Yosef. Yosef brings a bad report to their father. And then we find, it says that Yisrael loves Yosef more than all his children, and he makes him a special cloak, extra cloak. The brothers then see that their father loves him more than all the other brothers, and they hate him, and they can't speak with him in peace. So what drives the hatred? Not the bad reports, not the dibos amra, because there's no mention then. The Torah does not say that they hated Yosef because of that. When does the Torah talk about hatred? Only after the love that their father showed to Yosef more than the other brothers. And that needs comment. Why is that the case? Let's have a look at the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, who discusses this. Says the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, Hiktim, it starts telling us the reason for the hatred of the brothers for the younger brother, because Yisrael, that Yaakov loved Yosef more than all the other brothers. Pirish, that means, even though Yosef was bringing back reports about the brothers' activities, that itself wouldn't have had a disaster effect. Why? Because the brothers could have argued, and the brothers could have said and proved that they're right. And then their jealousy would have been gone and pushed to the side. But there was something that was really hurting them. And that was not just that he brought reports about their activities. It was the fact that they saw that the love of Yosef, of their father, was so strong, more than the brothers, more than all of them put together. And therefore, there's an expression, love makes one blind. There's no way that they would have had any chance of success to defend themselves against the accusations of Yosef. It was impossible. They could not do that. And for that reason, says the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, the Torah publicizes the love that their father showed for him. And says, what was that love? The love that he made a ksonis pasim. He made that special coat. It's telling us that they knew that. They knew, and their father knew that they knew that. That's why the Pasuk says, Vayiru Echav, the brothers saw clearly. It wasn't just something that the father kept private. It was an open fact that their father loved and demonstrated their love. And if that's the case, Ume'ato, from now on, they saw now there's no way we can fix it. There's no way we're going to be able to remedy this situation. So therefore, the Pasuk says, Vayisna Osai, they hated him because of what it says earlier. They brought bad report, etc. But why does it leave it till after describing the love of Yaakov to their father? Because that was That was what clinched it. There was now no hope to debate. There was no hope to defend themselves. There was no way they could have rebuked him or told him off, because anything that they would say to Dad, anything that they would say, would have no success, no chance of success. There was no way they could speak in peace. What does that mean? And here the Ohr HaChaim HaKodesh takes a very different slant than Rashi. Rashi explains that they couldn't speak with him because they were not at peace with him. There was no conversation they could have with him. The Ohr HaChaim says there was no way they could reconcile their machlokes. There was no way they could defend him. There's no way they could bring peace because of the block of the vision of their father by the love he had for them. Well, the Pasuk then continues and says that Yosef has a dream, and he insists on telling his dreams. And here, one of the famous questions that's asked is, why is it that if Yosef sees the effect that it's having, he sees the jealousy and the hatred resulting, and he keeps on doing it? Tzorich ladas, says there, and this is continuing the Ohr HaChaim. Why does Yosef heap hatred upon himself by telling the dreams, telling about his greatness? Magam, especially, Yoda, he already knows Kihisan. He knows he's already hated in their eyes. As Chazal say in the Pasuk, Vayomer lo hineni. On the words when Yaakov sends him out to see how his brothers are faring with the sheep, what does he answer? Hineni, here I am. What do Chazal say? That was a suicide mission. He was handing himself over. That's putting himself in the lion's den. He knew they hated him. And yet he said hineni because his father told him. Perhaps and the Ohr HaChaim HaKodesh offers three answers here. Answer one, maybe it was to inform that min hashamayim ha'elu l'mayla, that this that is going to be elevated is not something of his own doing. It's happening from heaven. How come it's happening from heaven? Yaakov, and the whole story here is b'haskama salyonim. He's been given the haskama from the, so to speak, the heavens above. All this love that Yaakov is doing, and the affection that's doing, and the greatness that he will achieve, that he's going to be a king, etc., it's happening because the Elyonim, it's happening from upstairs. He was hoping that they would stop hating him. In other words, he was using his dreams as a support for what his father was showing. Why is my father doing this? Because my father sees, and I have a dream to prove it, that there's something special that's going to be happening for me. And my father senses it and sees it happening. That's one explanation. Second explanation. Or maybe he wants to tell them, the time will come, they will need him, and they're going to have to bow down to him. They will need him. And having known that, they might have therefore kept a distance, not taking vengeance. Why? Knowing one day that they will be at his mercy. Because he was hoping that the tribes would subjugate themselves to the decree of God Almighty. Third answer. The third answer is perhaps a strange one. Ironic as it sounds, says the Ohr HaChaim HaKodesh in his third answer, perhaps the brothers were Yosef was trying to reconcile them. How do you reconcile them when you say these dreams to them? The Gemara says in Brachos that the person's dreams will always follow, achar hapeh, will follow the way they're interpreted, the way you say them. And the Gemara also says there in Brachos that when you have a dream, you've got to go to the people that love you, or you love them, and they will give you an explanation for it. Yosef thought or knew that the brothers knew that. And Yosef therefore thought that by telling these frank dreams to his brothers, they would actually see this as a measure of love. It would show that Yosef was so open with them, his heart was complete with them, that he's actually revealing to them his confidential dreams that you would expect keep confidential for most people. And he was hoping that would show, look, this is what's happening to me. I've got to tell you this. I wouldn't tell it to anybody else. I'm only telling it to you because I love you. I know it sounds strange. It actually had the opposite effect. Why did it have the opposite effect? Says the Arachaim HaKodesh, because there was already an underground jealousy. Because there was already an underlying hatred and jealousy, Nin alu share ha'ava, the gates of love were locked. And therefore they did not take it in that way at all. They took it all as one plan. He wants to rule over us. That's all they took. So now he tells them, listen to my dream. Listen to my dream that I've had. Now the word no that he uses can have two meanings. It could mean please, but the word no can also mean now. In fact, there's a third meaning, which means raw, but that doesn't apply here. So what is the explanation here of these two? The first explanation, says the Arachaim, no means please. As I said before, they didn't want to listen. And therefore he says, please, I know it's hard for you. I want you to listen. Please. Second explanation is, no means shimu no. Now listen. Now listen to what I'm going to tell you. Why now? And the Gemara Bracha says an interesting thing, that when you get a dream and you want it interpreted, you've got to do it on the day. Don't wait to the next day. If you want something positive, something coming out of the dream, it has to be told on that day. For that reason, if a person, God forbid, has a terrible, terrible dream, a nightmare, he should make a fast on the day, on the very day, on the night, the day following the night that he had the dream. So much so that it even overrides the Shabbos. A Tanis Chalom is even on Shabbos. Why? Because of the importance of not postponing it for another day. For that reason, he turns to them and he says, I've got to tell it to you now. No. Pirish, that means, I can't let it wait. Also, he wants to say, they shouldn't think that he's already gone to all his friends and told them the dream, etc., etc. He's telling them, no. Because if that would be the case, that would be the opposite of trying to show his affection to the brothers, as I explained just before, says the Arachaim. If you go around telling the world about you're going to lord yourself over your brothers, that would certainly not fare well for Yosef's relations with him. That would not show their friendly. And therefore, because he'd already had the interpretation given, perhaps by others. For that reason, he says, no, this is the first time I'm saying it. I'm telling it to you now, and I haven't told anybody else. It's confidential. It's something I'm only revealing to you. So what does he dream? He has two dreams. The first one is when the sheaves are being gathered in the field. And behold, your sheaves gather around me, and they bow down to the aluma, to my sheaf. The Arachaim HaKodesh notes that there are 3 times the word v'hine used here. Hine, anachnu alman. Hine, kam alamasi. Hine, tisavem sechem. Behold, we were gathering the sheaves. Behold, mine stood up. Behold, it stood erect. Says the Arachaim HaKodesh, why v'hine? And the Arachaim HaKodesh says that every time you see v'hine mean, it's something unusual, something bright, something happening. And according to him, according to the Arachaim, what Yosef was saying was that this was not a normal dream. Normally a dream is a vague sort of a memory, but this dream was bahir b'tzahir k'yom ya'ir. It was so clear, it was like the bright daylight. It was so clear, it was like I was awake. I mamish thought I was awake. And therefore he wants to tell them that this was not just a dream. By using the word v'hine 3 times and telling them that it was so real, it's mahazeh shakai yechazeh. It was a vision of Hashem. This was not just a dream, this was a vision. And therefore he wants to tell them that this shouldn't be just taken as a dream. What were the 3 events that it's referring to? The 3 events, says the Arachaim, that referring to were, number 1, the fact that the chavila, the alumes, the sheaves, refers to bundles of mitzvahs and refers to how Yosef was going to go through 3 events. 1, the story that one of his first trials after being sold was the story of how he stood up in the test with the wife of Potiphar. That was comma. He rises. The sheaf rises. He rises out of the house of Potiphar and makes a run. But Gamni Tzova, but it stands in its position. That refers to then rising to the power of Egypt. Shalit v'nitzav Mitzrayim. And then, what's the third one? When they're all bowing down, that's telling them that there's going to come a time where he will be Zonam Afanesosam. He's going to feed them and sustain them. Again, this is all in order to tell them, you are going to need my help. I'm going to be the one to feed you, to help you, etc. These are the three events, according to the Rechaim HaKodesh, that the dream of the sheaves refers to. They don't react well to this. They say, Hamalach Timlach Aleinu, you think you're going to be king over us? Imashal Tim Shalbana, you think you're going to rule over us? And they continue to hate him more for his dreams and for his words. Two expressions are used here. Malach Timlach, ruling or being a king. Mashal Timshal means to rule. It's a difference between Melucha and Memshala. The Netziv in his Emek Dover points out here that Melucha is something which is Beratzain. Or Malchusoi Beratzain Kibul Alehem, Moshe B'nai Yisrael, as we will soon say in Ma'ariv tonight. The Melucha is something which you accept willingly. Memshala, rule, that's by force. And here, the Emek Dover says, interestingly enough, that the brothers are saying, you think you're going to be king over us? You think you're going to do it in a way that we will accept you as a king? Maybe in Mashal Tim Shalbana. Maybe, if anything, you may rule over us by force, but we would never willingly accept you as a king over us. This is how he explains the dream. What's interesting is that the brothers don't respond to the second dream, only the first dream. They don't respond to the dream about the stars and the sky and the moon and the sun bowing down to him. Why is it? And here we find that Beis Halevi explains, Rabbi Soloveitchik explains, that there could be two reasons. The first reason is that when they said to him, Hamalech Timloch Aleinu, will you be a king over us? They regretted afterwards what they had said. Because the Gemara in Bracha says that if you interpret a dream, that could actually happen. Therefore, they contemplate, they reflect upon their words. And although they said it sarcastically, but in effect, they're almost giving credence, almost giving legitimacy to his dream by saying, Hamalech Timloch Aleinu. They reflected upon what they did. They continued their hatred for his dreams. And they said, when it comes to the second dream, we're not going to respond. We're not going to give credence to anything of his dreams. And he talks about the stars and the moon and everything going down. And here we find, says the Beis Halevi, Shosku, they remained silent, just absolutely silent, not a word. Then afterwards we find they tell the father and the brothers, and the father tells him off. Shall we come to bow down to you? And just like the part about the mother not happening, the moon not being able to be there because your mother is passed away, so the rest of the dream cannot happen as well. So he has the second dream, but for some reason, Yosef wants to tell it to them, and he seems to think that the second dream will not anger the brothers. And that's quite interesting. Why would it not anger the brothers? The Ksava Kabbalah talked about this, and he says, even though Yosef saw that is heaping up more hatred from the first dream, he doesn't stop telling him the second dream because he thinks the first dream didn't help, because they will not see the hand of heaven so clearly in this. And therefore, it'll be hard for them to remove their hatred. Because they're probably thinking that the dream is not a prophecy. And maybe it's what he thinks about during the day. As the Gemara says, you tend to dream about what you think about in the day. Or maybe he just made up the dream. The second dream, however, was very different. They saw things here that there's no way he would make this up as a lie. It's one thing to be a lord over your brothers, but to have your father bow down to you, that there's something more to it than that. And therefore, he tells it to them because he believes now that this type of a dream is a heavenly dream. It's a gezerah of Hashem. He's hoping it'll cool their anger down. And the Pasuk tells us that to a certain extent, he achieved that goal. Because after telling them the dream, have a look and see their reaction. What's their reaction? The Pasuk says, let's look at the verses down below here. He tells his father, the brothers, and the father scolds him and says, what is this dream that you've dreamt? Shall I come and your mother, etc.? Vayekanu boy Echov, and the brothers are jealous of him. No mention of hatred Not a single word about hatred. Says the Beis Halevi, why? Because now, Hikiru, they recognize that this is a prophecy. It's not just a dream. And it's from heaven that they're coming, La Roimamai Alayhim, to actually put him up upon everyone. Their hatred, says the Beis Halevi, stops, at least temporarily. It stops then. But the jealousy of the Kavod and the Romos, that now grows. So hatred gives way to jealousy, and we see it clearly in the Psukim, as it says, Vaikanu Vayacham. The father scolds off Yosef, and he tells them, no, it cannot happen. Don't you know what are you making up these things for? Your mother's already died. But he didn't know it was referring to Bilhah, who brought him up like a mother. Our rabbis, however, say, how come there was this part of the dream that didn't fit? And it's to tell us that every dream, even a dream of a prophecy, will have something with Dvarim B'Teilim. But Yaakov said this in order to eradicate the jealousy from the brothers. And he wanted to tell the brothers, don't worry about it. It's, as we say in Yiddish, shtusim. Just like im apshe be'imcha, kama shar bottle, so the rest is nullified, is not there at all. We find afterwards that it says that the father, Yaakov, shamaris hadavar, he kept the matter. He was shamaris hadavar. Oh, we missed out the Orach Chaim, didn't we? The Orach Chaim says, why did hatred give way to jealousy? He says, because the reason is there's no way in the world that the children of Yaakov will receive greatness from the nations only because of their father. And therefore, it doesn't make sense that their father is going to bow down to Yosef. And therefore, the dream is completely cancelled. They cannot think that way. But in this dream, they remove Hasiru Hasafek Shahaya Lahem B'Chalam Rishon. They now get rid of that doubt that was in the first dream, which was that maybe the dream was coming because of Yosef's thoughts, his ambitions. Why did they think this way? Says Orach Chaim, like Choshav, there's no way that they could think that he was going to, or that he could think that he is going to rule over his father. This must be something coming from heaven. And therefore, again, like the Beis Halevi, the Orach Chaim HaKodesh feels that hatred gives way now to jealousy. It's jealousy because they feel something's happening in heaven, that this is a heavenly guide that's happening, but they're jealous of it. What does Yaakov himself do? Yaakov shamaris hadavar. He preserves the matter. He waits for it to happen. Says Rashi, Hoyomamtin umetzape masayavoy. He was waiting, when is it going to happen? And Rashi brings two psukim from Tanakh, Yeshayahu and Eov, to prove that the word shamar does not mean guard, but can mean sometimes to wait. Shomer emunim, waiting faithfully for God's promise to occur, for the Geula to come. Or in the book of Eov, Lo tishma al-chatasi, do not wait for my sin. But it's interesting that Rashi mentions two words, mamtin and mitzapeh, waiting and hoping. And here we find I'm running out of time here, Parsha B'Torah, we find the word mitzapeh could relate to something only that's positive. Tzipiyah means hoping, waiting. Mamtin in Hebrew, the word for mamtin, also meaning waiting, could be used for something negative as well. What was the positive thing that was going to come out of this whole story of this week's Parsha? The positive thing is what's at the end, the aliyah that will take place through Mitzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah. What's the davar shlili? What's the negative? The negative that's going to come about is more the immediate, short-term descent to Egypt and the beginning of bondage, of hard slavery. How interesting that the psukim relate to these things as well. So Rashi brings two proofs, one from Shayahu Shomer Amunim, where there the word Shomer is used in a positive sense, waiting expectantly, waiting for the Geula to happen. And there the prophet describes the beautiful emunah that the Jewish people have in the midst of Golus. They're still waiting for the Geula to happen. That's corresponding to Mitzapeh. Then you have a pasuk in Eov, don't wait for my sin. Waiting for sin is something very negative. Lo tamtin, So Rashi uses the word tamtin, mamtin, which can also be used for something negative. How interesting, because this was exactly the case. On the one hand, Yaakov was waiting and waiting for the positive result, the end result, Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah. At the end, that is Mitzapeh. He's looking forward to it. But at the same time, Mamtin, he's looking with trepidation about the beginning of the Golus. And in fact, he's frightened, and Hashem has to reassure him, as we read in the coming weeks, don't be frightened of the Golus, etc., etc. Well, we've come to 9:30 here. I'm sorry I didn't finish. I can go on, or we can stop here. I leave it up to the... I've got 5 more minutes, but do you want us to stop here?
I think we're all happy for you to go on, Rabbi, for a further 5 minutes.
Okay, I just feel bad if I'm gone over time. That's all. Okay. Just to finish off, why would Yaakov be waiting and hoping for all the brothers to bow down to Yosef? I mean, does a father really want and waiting for that to happen? And yet, that's what the pasuk says. Va'aviv shamar es hadavar. The father was waiting for it to happen, and not just happen, but not just waiting, mitzapeh, almost looking forward to it to happen. Strange thing to look forward to. Again, this comes from the sefer called Parsha Torah, quoting from the Likkutei Sichos from the Rabbi, and it gives an insight into the story of the brothers of Yosef. Not all the brothers are the same. The work or the avodah of the brothers was generally of a calmer nature, shepherds, without the real bothers of worldly matters. They were not thrown into the hoo-ha of the world. They were really gentle shepherds. Yosef, on the other hand, was Mishnah LaMelech, second command to the king, occupied in running an entire country, the defense and the financial affairs of the whole land of Egypt, the greatest metropolis in the world then. But not only do these disturbances or distractions not take away from his connection to godliness, but on the contrary, Yosef succeeds in bringing godliness into the Enyonim Mitzrayim itself. Samti Adon L'chol Mitzrayim, as some of them Farshim say, not just God has made me a master of Egypt, I have made God a master of Egypt, etc. And therefore, Yaakov was waiting for the time that the tribes will bow down to Yosef. Why? Why is he waiting for that time? Because he realizes that Yosef has something over and above what all the other tribes had. And that is that Yosef can show his brothers that you can be in the world, thrust into the Nyan Olam, and still remain Yosef HaTzadik. And not only Yosef HaTzadik, but in fact able to bring godliness into the world. Through the Hitzpatlut Yosef, it's through the brothers bowing to Yosef, taking, if you like, the energy, the koach from Yosef, that will give the other tribes as well the ability, lekabel mimeno is koach hamyuchad, to get that special strength to preserve their dveikus in Hashem, even in Egypt, so that even when their generations will be in the deepest golus, they'll be able to stand strong like Yosef did. Therefore, Yaakov is looking forward, not because he's looking forward to the lordship of Yosef over the brothers per se, but on the contrary, to give the strength to the other brothers. The second explanation of it is as follows. The Mefarshim explain that the reign of Yosef was hinting to the Mashiach ben Yosef, who, Chazal say, will herald the coming of Mashiach ben David. This is hinted to also in the pasuk that Rashi brings for the word shomer. What is the word? The pasuk is shomer emunim, guarding and waiting with emunah for the Gula to happen. And if we look at the Rashi there in the pasuk in Yeshayahu Hanavi, we find Rashi says the following words. Shomer, what does shomer emunim mean? Sheshomer umitzapeh begaluto yamim rabim, the nation that waits and looks forward in the Golus, no matter how long the days are, for the faithful promise of Hashem that he will promise them, l'ga'olam, to redeem them. So in a way, Rashi has brought that pasuk of Shomer Emunim from the pasuk Yeshayahu, not just to demonstrate the word Shomer as meaning Mamtinu Mitzapeh, waiting for it to happen, that Shomer, the word means Shomer, but also to perhaps hint to the fact that Yaakov was looking forward for the time that Mashiach ben Yosef will herald the Mashiach ben David, because that was symbolized by Yosef himself being the one who would be reigning and ruling over the country of Egypt and even ruling over his brothers. Thank you for listening. I know it's a very hard topic to discuss, and we've touched a bit